I stood in the pristine conference room on the 42nd floor, watching through the glass wall as my husband pressed his security badge against the reader for the third time. The red light flashed. Denied. His face was a study in confusion, that particular expression people get when reality hasn't caught up with the decisions that led them here. I could see him mouth something to the receptionist, could see her shaking her head with practiced professional sympathy. She was following my instructions perfectly. 3 days ago, this building had been as much his workplace as mine. 3 days ago, his badge would have opened every door, granted him access to every floor, every system. 3 days ago, he was the CTO of Cypher Solutions. The company we'd built together over 7 years of 80-hour weeks and maxed out credit cards and passionate arguments about architecture that always ended with us on the same side. 3 days ago, I still believed we were partners. Now I watched him pull out his phone. Watched it light up in his hand. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't reach for it. I'd been ignoring his calls since 6 a.m. Since the moment I walked into our lawyer's offices and signed the papers that would dismantle everything we'd built together. Everything I'd built, I corrected myself. That was the truth I'd learned too late. The receptionist was pointing now, gesturing toward the elevator, toward the exit. He wasn't listening. He was staring at his phone, at my name on the screen, at the call that wouldn't connect. Then his head snapped up. His eyes scanned the building's interior through the glass facade. Looking for me. Looking for an explanation. I took one step back from the window. Not hiding exactly, but not offering myself up for his confusion either. Let him wonder. Let him piece it together the same way I'd pieced together his betrayal over the past 8 weeks. Slowly, painfully, one damning piece of evidence at a time. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Text messages now, arriving in rapid succession. I could imagine what they said without reading them. Where are you? What's happening? Why won't they let me in? Call me. We need to talk. But we didn't need to talk. Talking was what you did before someone destroyed 7 years of trust, 7 years of partnership, 7 years of your life's work. After that, you did what I'd spent the last 3 days doing. You protected yourself with lawyers and documentation, and the cold precision of someone who'd finally learned that mercy was wasted on people who'd already shown you exactly who they were. How did I get here? Standing in our company's headquarters, watching my husband locked out of the building, his career about to implode, his reputation about to be shredded? To understand that, you need to understand where it all began. You need to understand the launch party. But before we get there, let me tell you something about the tech world that nobody admits out loud. Ideas are currency. Code is power. And attribution, the acknowledgement of who created what, who contributed which innovation, that's everything. Your name on a patent, on a commit, on a technical white paper, that's your future. That's your valuation. That's the difference between being a founder and being forgotten. I learned that lesson too late. But I learned it thoroughly. 8 weeks ago, we were 3 months from our IPO. Cypher Solutions, the cybersecurity startup my husband and I had founded in our cramped 1-bedroom apartment 7 years prior, was about to go public. Our valuation was sitting at $300 million. We had clients across 3 continents. We had a board of directors that included 2 former NSA directors and the CEO of a Fortune 100 company. We had everything we dreamed about during those early years of ramen dinners and rejected pitch decks and 18-hour coding sessions. The launch party for our flagship product, Sentinel, was scheduled for a Friday night at the Cosmopolitan Hotel's rooftop venue. 200 guests. Tech press, venture capitalists, enterprise clients, employees. Open bar, catered dinner, a presentation showcasing Sentinel's capabilities. This was our moment. Our validation. The night we proved that 2 kids from state universities could compete with Stanford grads and Silicon Valley royalty. I'd spent 3 months preparing for that night. Not just the party logistics, though I'd handled those too, but the technical demonstration. Sentinel was my baby. I'd designed the core algorithm, written 60% of the codebase, architected the system that made it revolutionary. My husband handled the business side, the fundraising, the glad handing with investors, the strategy. That was our division of labor. That was our agreement. I built it. He sold it. The night of the party, I wore a black dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Simple, elegant, expensive in a way that our early years would have made impossible. My husband wore the suit I'd helped him pick out, navy blue with a subtle pattern that photographed well. We arrived together, walking into the venue hand in hand, playing the role of the perfect founding couple. The tech world loves a good origin story, and we had a great one. College sweethearts who turned a dorm room project into a unicorn. Except that wasn't quite true. We'd met in college, yes, but the dorm room project had been mine. An encryption algorithm I'd developed for my thesis. He'd been in business school. He'd seen the commercial potential I'd been too naive to recognize. He'd convinced me we should build a company together. And I'd said yes, because I loved him, because I trusted him, because the idea of building something together felt romantic and right. 7 years later, standing in that rooftop venue watching San Francisco glitter below us, I still believed that story. Still believed we were a team. The presentation was scheduled for 8:30. At 8:15, my husband pulled me aside. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Excitement, nervousness, something else. "I need to tell you something before we start," he said. My stomach clenched. In my experience, nothing good ever followed those words. "The board had some feedback on the presentation," he continued. "They think it'll land better with investors if I deliver it. The business angles, the market positioning. They think having the CEO present gives it more weight." I stared at him. "We agreed I'd do the technical demo. That's my part. You do the business case, I do the technology." "I know. And you'll still be involved. You'll be on stage. But they think." He paused. "They think the optics are better if I'm leading it." Optics. That word again. The word that had been creeping into our conversations more and more as the IPO approached. The word that meant your technical expertise matters less than your ability to look the part. "What optics?" I asked, keeping my voice level even as anger began to simmer. "Rebecca." His hand found my elbow. "Don't make this a thing. It's one presentation. You'll get plenty of credit. Plenty of credit. For my own work." How generous. But I didn't argue. Not there, not then, with 200 guests arriving, with reporters waiting, with our entire future hanging on this night going perfectly. So I smiled. I nodded. I said, "Fine. Whatever the board thinks is best." His relief was visible. "You're amazing. This is why we work." I watched him walk away toward the staging area. Watched him review the slides I'd created, the demonstration I'd designed, the technical breakthrough I'd spent 3 years developing. And something cold settled in my chest. The presentation began at 8:45. I stood stage left, visible, but not central, while my husband addressed the crowd. He was good at this. Charismatic, confident. Able to translate complex technical concepts into digestible business value. The crowd loved him. When he got to the technical demonstration, he moved through my slides with practiced ease. Explaining the algorithm, the innovation, the competitive advantage. Using all the right terminology, hitting all the technical points. And never once saying we developed or our team created or even acknowledging I was standing there. It was all I designed and I built and my breakthrough. I felt my face freeze into a smile. Felt every muscle in my body go rigid. Around me, the audience was nodding, impressed. Taking notes. Asking questions that he answered smoothly, confidently, like he'd written every line of code himself. At one point, a journalist from TechCrunch asked about the cryptographic approach. A technical question that required deep knowledge of the implementation. My husband glanced at me, just for a second. Then he answered. Correctly, impressively, using explanations I'd given him dozens of times during our practice sessions. The presentation ended to applause. My husband basked in it, shook hands, accepted congratulations. Several people approached me afterward to say, "You must be so proud of your husband, and he's brilliant, you're lucky to have him." I smiled. I agreed. I played the supportive wife. And I began to pay attention in a way I should have been paying attention all along. Over the next week, I watched the press coverage roll in. Article after article about Derek Chen, visionary CEO, technical genius, the next young innovator in cybersecurity. My name appeared occasionally, always as co-founder or Derek's wife, also involved in the company. Never as the architect of the technology that was generating all this excitement. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself ego was useless in business, that results were what counted, that when the IPO happened we'd both benefit equally. Except that wasn't true either. And I was about to find out exactly how untrue it was. 2 weeks after the launch party, I was working late in my office. It was past midnight. The engineering floor was empty except for me and the hum of servers in the adjacent room. I was debugging a security module when my laptop screen flickered. A notification appeared. An automated alert from our code repository. Someone had pushed a commit to a private branch. Nothing unusual about that. Engineers committed code at all hours. But this commit was on a repository I didn't recognize. Not one of our official project repos. Curious, I clicked through. The repository was named Nexus Core, and it had been created 3 months ago. Private. Only 2 contributors. My husband and Brandon Lee, one of our senior engineers. My hand hovered over the mouse. This could be nothing. A side project, research, a spike to test new approaches. We encouraged that kind of exploration. But something about the name bothered me. Nexus. It sounded like a product name. Like our naming convention. I clicked into the repository and began reading the code. 20 minutes later, my hands were shaking. What I was looking at was a complete cybersecurity platform. Not Sentinel, but something new. Something that incorporated Sentinel's core algorithm, my algorithm, but extended it. Built on it. Transformed it into something more comprehensive. And it was nearly finished. Months of work. Hundreds of commits. Thousands of lines of code. I checked the commit messages. Most were from Brandon, but the architecture documents, the technical specifications, those were authored by my husband. And they were dated starting 4 months ago. A month before our launch party. I opened the specification documents and began to read. With each page, the sick feeling in my stomach intensified. This wasn't a Cypher Solutions project. This was a competing product. And according to the business plan buried in the repository, it was designed to be the flagship offering of a new company. A company called Nexus Security. Founded by Derek Chen and Brandon Lee. My husband was building a competitor to our company. Using our technology. My technology. Planning to leave Cypher Solutions right after the IPO, taking the valuation bump and the cash out, and then launching a rival company that would cannibalize our market. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My first instinct was to storm into our house, wake him up, demand an explanation. My second instinct was to call our board, our lawyers, our investors, everyone. But I did neither. Because I'm a software engineer. And software engineers debug methodically. You don't assume you understand the problem from one data point. You gather more data. You test your hypothesis. You document everything. So that's what I did. Over the next 6 weeks, I became a forensic investigator of my own marriage and my own company. I started with the code repository, downloading everything, documenting every commit, every conversation in the comments, every specification document. The paper trail was extensive. This wasn't a casual side project. This was a fully planned corporate espionage operation. Next, I checked our corporate Slack. I had admin access to all channels, including private messages, a fact my husband had apparently forgotten. I found months of conversations between him and Brandon. Planning sessions. Technical discussions. And increasingly, conversations about timing. We need to wait until after IPO, my husband had written 2 months ago. Let the stock vest. Cash out. Then we launch Nexus 6 months later. By then, we'll have enough runway to poach the key engineers. What about Rebecca? Brandon had asked. There was a long pause in the message thread. Then, she's brilliant, but she's not business-minded. She won't see it coming until it's too late. And honestly, she'll be fine. She'll make plenty from the IPO. She can retire, start a new project, whatever. This is about us building something we actually own. I read that message 3 times. Each time, it hurt more. Not just the betrayal, but the casual dismissal. The assumption that I was technically competent but strategically naive. That I wouldn't notice. Wouldn't care. Would just accept being sidelined from the company I'd built. I kept digging. Checked our corporate credit card statements. Found charges for an office space lease starting next month. Found payments to a law firm I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced the firm, discovered they specialized in corporate formation and intellectual property. I accessed our cap table, the document showing who owned what percentage of Cypher Solutions. My husband and I each owned 22%. Not equal, I noticed for the first time. His stake was 0.5% higher. Something about voting rights from the last funding round, he'd explained. I'd signed off on it without examining the details. Stupid. But 22% of $300 million was still $66 million. After the IPO, after taxes, we'd each walk away with roughly $40 million. Generational wealth. Enough to never work again if we didn't want to. Except he did want to work. He wanted to build Nexus. And he planned to do it using the technical foundation I'd created, the reputation we'd built together, and presumably the engineers he'd poach from our company. All while I sat there with my pile of money, none the wiser until his company was competing directly against Cypher Solutions, destroying the value of my own equity. It was brilliant, in a sociopathic way. He'd get rich twice. First from our IPO. Then from building a better competitor using insider knowledge and my core technology. The only problem with his plan was that he'd underestimated me. Assumed I was too focused on the technical work to notice the business machinations happening around me. Assumed I'd be satisfied with the money and wouldn't care about the attribution, the credit, the recognition of being the actual innovator behind our success. He was wrong on all counts. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case. Not just documenting his theft, but understanding every legal angle, every piece of leverage I had. I consulted with 3 different intellectual property attorneys, carefully, using hypothetical scenarios, never revealing it was my own company, my own husband. I needed to know my options before I acted. What I learned was both encouraging and infuriating. The code he was using, my core algorithm, that was clearly my intellectual property, developed before we'd even incorporated Cypher Solutions. I had my thesis papers, my academic publications, time-stamped proof that predated the company. Any court would recognize me as the inventor. But the code in the Nexus repository? That was more complicated. It had been developed using Cypher Solutions resources, on company time, by a company employee. That made it company property. And since my husband was co-founder and CEO, he had legitimate access to it. Unless I could prove he'd intended to misappropriate it from the start. Which I could, thanks to his Slack messages. The attorneys I consulted all said the same thing. I had a case. A strong one. But corporate litigation was expensive, time-consuming, and would likely destroy Cypher Solutions in the process. The IPO would be delayed indefinitely. Investors would flee. Employees would leave. Even if I won, I'd win a Pyrrhic victory, getting legal ownership of a company that had imploded. None of them asked the question I was really struggling with. The personal one. The one that kept me awake at night after I'd finish my investigation work and crawl into bed beside a man who'd spent 7 years lying to me. Did I want to destroy him? Or did I just want to save what we'd built? The answer came to me at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 8 weeks after the launch party. I was lying in bed, listening to him breathe beside me, thinking about every late night we'd worked together in those early years. Every celebration when we'd landed a new client. Every moment I'd thought we were partners. We'd never been partners. I'd been the builder. He'd been the opportunist who saw a builder and recognized a resource to exploit. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The pattern had been there from the beginning. The way he'd taken my thesis project and said we should build a company. The way he'd handled all the legal paperwork while I focused on the technology. The way my equity had ended up 0.5% lower than his. The way he'd gradually taken credit for technical innovations in investor meetings. The way my name had slowly disappeared from the narrative of who we were and what we'd built. He'd been planning this from the start. Maybe not Nexus specifically, but the general strategy of positioning himself as the visionary while I did the actual work. And it had worked because I'd let it work. Because I'd loved him. Because I'd trusted him. Because I'd been stupid enough to believe that partnership meant anything to him beyond what he could extract from it. I got out of bed. Went to my home office. Opened my laptop. And began to plan. If he wanted to play the long game, I could play longer. The key to revenge, I realized, wasn't destruction. It was precision. It was understanding leverage. It was knowing exactly what someone valued and taking it away with surgical accuracy. My husband valued two things: money and recognition. He wanted to be seen as the brilliant innovator. He wanted to be wealthy. He wanted both, and he'd built an elaborate plan to get both by stealing my work. So I'd take both away from him. But I'd do it legally, methodically, in a way that left me standing, and him in ruins. Here's what most people don't understand about the tech industry. It moves fast. Reputation is everything. And once you're labeled as someone who steals IP, who betrays partners, who commits corporate espionage, you're done. No investor will touch you. No talented engineer will work for you. No board will appoint you. I didn't need to destroy him in court. I needed to destroy him in the industry. The next morning, I contacted our board chair, Patricia Montgomery. She was a former Google executive, tough, smart, and fiercely protective of corporate integrity. I asked for an emergency private meeting. I've discovered a significant IP theft issue, I told her. It involves our core technology and plans to launch a competitor. I have documentation. I need legal counsel present, and I need the board's guidance on how to proceed. To her credit, Patricia didn't waste time with questions. I'll have our attorneys ready. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. That evening, my husband came home excited. I've been thinking, he said. After the IPO, we should take that trip to Japan we've always talked about. Maybe 3 weeks. We'll have earned it. I looked at him. At the smile that didn't reach his eyes. At the man I'd spent 7 years building a life with. That sounds perfect, I said. The meeting with the board lasted 4 hours. I presented everything. The code repository. The Slack messages. The business plan for Nexus Security. The office lease. The timeline that showed this had been planned for months. The proof that our core technology, my technology, was being replicated with the intention of competing against us. Patricia's face grew colder with each piece of evidence. The board's attorney, Michael Santos, took notes with increasing speed. When I finished, the room was silent. This is clear misappropriation of company assets, Michael finally said. And the Slack messages show intent. We can terminate him for cause immediately. No severance. And we can sue him personally for damages. What about the IPO? One of the other board members asked. We'll need to delay it, Patricia said. Probably 6 months while we deal with this. But Rebecca, if you're willing to take over as CEO, if we can demonstrate continuity of leadership and that the technical vision is intact, we can recover. Every head turned to me. I'll do it, I said. The next 72 hours were a carefully orchestrated operation. The board voted unanimously to terminate my husband for cause. We secured a restraining order, preventing him from accessing any company's systems or property. We filed a lawsuit for IP theft and breach of fiduciary duty. And we informed every single one of our investors, employees, and major clients about what had happened and the steps we were taking. The tech press got wind of it by day 2. The story exploded. CEO of high-profile security startup caught planning to steal company IP and launch competitor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A cybersecurity company's own CEO had committed corporate espionage. My husband's name became synonymous with betrayal in Silicon Valley. His LinkedIn was flooded with brutal comments. The law firm that had been helping him set up Nexus Security dropped him as a client. And Brandon, the engineer who'd been helping him, resigned immediately and issued a public apology. As for me, I became the story everyone wanted to tell. The brilliant female founder who'd been sidelined by her husband, who'd discovered his betrayal, who'd taken back her company and her reputation. Forbes called me. TechCrunch wrote a feature. I gave interviews where I was careful, measured, focusing on the facts and the company's future, never emotional, never vindictive. Just competent. Just in control. The part I didn't tell any of them was personal. The part about coming home to an empty house because my husband had moved out the same day he was terminated. The part about filing for divorce with the same attorneys who were handling the corporate lawsuit. The part about lying awake at night, not because I missed him, but because I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. What I did tell them was true. I was taking Cypher Solutions forward. I was the technical visionary, always had been. And now I was the CEO too. We'd complete our IPO in 6 months. And we'd do it my way, with proper attribution, with accurate representation of who built what, with a culture that valued actual innovation over personal glory. The IPO happened exactly 6 months later. Our valuation held. I rang the opening bell at the Nasdaq with my engineering team beside me. No husband. No stolen credit. Just the people who'd actually done the work, getting the recognition they deserved. My shares were worth $70 million after it all settled. I gave significant equity bonuses to my core team, including the engineers who'd stayed loyal. I bought a house in Pacific Heights with a view of the bay. I slept better than I had in years. My ex-husband's shares? Forfeited when he was terminated for cause. His stake in Cypher Solutions? Gone. His reputation in Silicon Valley? Destroyed. His plan to launch Nexus Security? Dead before it could start, because no one would fund him and no engineer would join him. He tried to fight the lawsuit. It dragged on for 18 months. In the end, he settled, agreeing to a permanent injunction preventing him from using any technology derived from my original algorithm. He had to pay a substantial financial penalty. And he had to sign a public statement acknowledging that he'd violated his fiduciary duties and misappropriated company resources. I framed that statement. Not to hang on my wall, but to keep in my desk drawer. A reminder that trust is earned, that partnerships require integrity, and that the moment someone shows you they're willing to steal your work, your credit, your future, you believe them. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that launch party. About standing on stage, while he took credit for my work. About the moment I smiled and decided not to make a scene. About how close I came to just accepting it, to telling myself it didn't matter. To prioritizing our relationship over my own recognition. If I'd done that, if I'd stayed quiet, he'd have succeeded. Would have walked away with $40 million and launched a competitor that might have destroyed everything I'd built. Would have spent the rest of his career being celebrated as a technical genius while I faded into the background as his wife who helped out. Instead, I'm the CEO of a company worth $500 million. I hold 17 patents in my name. And when people talk about innovation in cybersecurity, they mention me, not him. He's working at a mid-sized consulting firm now. I heard he married Brandon's ex-girlfriend. They live in Austin. He's completely out of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Persona non grata. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty. If I think the punishment was too severe. If I worry that I destroyed his career. I don't. Because he destroyed it himself. I just documented what he'd done and let the consequences play out. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so successful, so undeniably yours, that no one can ever again question who the real innovator was. It's taking back your narrative. It's refusing to be erased from your own story. He thought I wouldn't notice. Thought I was too focused on the code to see the bigger game he was playing. Thought I'd be satisfied with money, and wouldn't fight for recognition. He was wrong on every count. And that miscalculation cost him everything. Standing in that conference room 8 weeks ago, watching him try his badge on the security reader, watching the red light flash denial. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. This was justice. Not revenge. Justice. And I'd earned every single moment of it.